welcome to this room, Moscow, and to our second conversation on what connects us. And it is nicely tying in with the previous panel. And let us just start with a brief reflection. Just consider you're discussing politics at a party and you realize quickly that you can really enter into an argument because of your different opinions. You might have made the first mistake, talk politics at a party. Do you still do this, Julia? Well, I think I cannot help it because you actually discuss the topics that you're mostly interested in, and this is why sometimes it's really hard not to talk about this, but sometimes it might be more pleasant to just not speak about this for yourself. Yes, it might also be more pleasant for the rest of the evening. Yes, it depends on who's the host and whether I want to spoil the party or not. But, I'm not really in that party age anymore. It's a different generation, maybe yours. Okay, I'm not going to comment. So how does this happen that we are experiencing such a polarization so quickly, even though we have so many things in common? For example, looking at the party example, you are at a party, maybe in a group of friends, you might even know the host, but still it's sometimes different to find what we have in common. Yes, what divides us, what brings us together, and this is a question or two questions that are dominating the biography of Laura Kristine Krause. For many years, she has been dealing with the question of how trust in society can be fostered and how social cohesion can be secured. In 2018, she founded More in Common in Germany, and she also conducted a study on the other division in Germany. The invisible 1/3 is what she was focusing on. That is the part of the population that is between the two poles, that is the pole of the liberal, cosmopolitan ones and those who are more authoritarian. And she says that there at the center in this 1/3 is social stability. And mostly the public debate is dominated by the others. And before that, she used to be the think tank head of program at the Center for a Democratic Future and was developing the department. And now she is heading the new unit in the Federal Ministry of Finance on modern Germany. And she would also like to foster in her position how to further stabilize trust in our democracy in the Federal Ministry of Finance. So a warm welcome to Laura Kristine Krause. Great that you are here right amongst us. Yes, and thank you also for welcoming me so friendly. In such a friendly way. Yes, I think it's easy when we have such friendly guests. With More in Common, you were doing some research at the fringes of society, or you were also discussing the divides in society. Now you are active in politics in the Federal Ministry of Finance. So what motivated you to go there? That question was asked to me very frequently, and I do understand this because I would also ask the same question to myself. It is a direct consequence of my work over the past 7, 8, or 9 years because, as you both said, I very much did some research into German society. Where are we actually really separate? Where are we much closer together than we think or than the public debate would suggest? But over the years, I have also wondered, where is my actual own lever and where can I make a difference? And in the role that I had before, it was fantastic. We always had research that backed us, and we could also bring evidence to many different stakeholders in society, give our recommendations, and then walk away again. And that was sometimes a very good role. I spent a few months in the United States over the past year and during the elections as well. And I also looked at my own country from that distance, also when the German coalition broke up. And I was just thinking, well, We cannot just try and not make things happen and forego all of the opportunities that we have. And then I was asked whether I wanted to join the new government. I said, yes, okay, why not? Even though I think it is a daunting challenge, but this opportunity does not arise so often. This is why I said yes. And did you wonder why this was created in the Ministry of Finance? I can tell you this has to do with Lars Klingbeil and his vice chancellor role. It is not a role that is laid down in the constitution, but the Ministry of Finance is also very often seen as the vice chancellery in Germany. So we're not only accompanying the policies of the Federal Ministry of Finance, but of the government at large. So it's always to do with the ministers' interests and topics and trying to make this part of a larger societal debate. Otherwise, it would be pretty unusual to have this in the Federal Ministry of Finance, but it had to do with the Vice Chancellery under Robert Habeck. In the Ministry for Economic Affairs, there was a similar unit. This was dealing with transformation, and we are kind of in the same role. One foot in day-to-day politics and one foot elsewhere. And this is what mostly people don't have in their daily work. So modern Germany is the name of your unit. Is this more with an exclamation mark or a question mark? Are you the one who is going to ask what is the future of Germany going to look like, of modern Germany? Or are you saying we are modern Germany and now we're going to support this with the following things? So how do you see yourself? Well, because we are, this is a question that is being asked within the ministry, because the officials also needed to look twice when they saw the new organizational chart and they saw the new directorate title. I can tell you that what I think I am doing is that I want to spell this out, first of all, because in the debates about ourselves, we very often don't see ourselves positively as a country. And this is also part of what we see, and it's something that is contributing to our self-image. For me, a modern country is a country that is aware of its weaknesses, but also of its strengths. You need to know this in the big picture and also when it comes to your own personal life. We know our weaknesses and we are very much focusing on these weaknesses so often. But being aware of one's strengths, especially in times like these. I was also trying to listen to the previous panel, and there are enormous debates which are currently happening when it comes to our welfare state as well in Germany. So we need this so that we know what we want to preserve, what we want to improve, and this is part of being a modern country. And secondly, the topic of modern government or a modern state plays a very important role in the current government. It's also something that we would like to coordinate for the Ministry of Finance in my directorate. We are working very closely together with the new ministry because it is also a key factor in the trust of citizens in the state. Mostly I'm in contact with the state in administrative affairs, sometimes for elections every 4 years, and sometimes if I'm in trouble with the police. And I think that the Ministry of Finance can modernize all of this and become more focused on the citizens. In 2023, there was a bottom line of the More in Common research, which was not positive. Collective lack of trust and divided society, being fearful of the future and of social decline and injustice. Injustice would be our topic here today. The central task of your unit is generating trust in the functioning of our democracy. So where do you see the major breaches in trust in our democracy, and where do you see levers? So that's a two-pronged question to change this. It is tying in with what I did in my research. With More in Common, since 2019, we could see over time in our research how this sense of injustice developed further in Germany. In our first major research, 92% said that Germany was unfair or unjust. Sorry, 69%. And we were criticized back then that we had such pessimistic data. So you were criticized for the data? Yes, yes, this is what happens sometimes. Yeah, kill the messenger. That's what they do sometimes. And then, interestingly, and we might have forgotten this, during Corona, during the COVID pandemic, so many trust indicators improved. More trust in the ability to act of the state, in the media, and this sense of injustice. But ever since the COVID pandemic and the inflation crisis, we are on the increase again. 80% is the current number. So 80% of Germans say that Germany is more of an unfair, an unjust country. And this is something that political players need to also acknowledge. And we asked people what exactly they mean when we did this research with More in Common. And there are also different associations everywhere what we mean by this. But in other research data, we could see that it was very important to people that Germany is a fair, is a just country. We could also say, you know, we're an unjust society, but it doesn't matter. But it is an ideal of people in this country to have a just country. And therefore, it is important for politics in the forthcoming debates to, first of all, understand what exactly we mean by justice. And in our directorate, I am not the Minister of Finance. I am just part of a small link of the chain, but we are trying to really introduce the views of the population through empirical data. So I also looked into opinion polls that already existed, and I also have the citizens' dialogue. In the Ministry of Finance, we have so many groups of visitors, 10,000 people per year that come to the ministry, and the ministry also receives letters, and we also use this very intensively as our feedback loop. Because in politics, mostly you look at the media, the press, that is what is shaping the debates, and this is part of what is shaping our Berlin bubble. And I'm always trying to also pay attention to the citizens' views. This is part of justice, and it also provides a different momentum to our daily activities. Yes, I am thinking about different aspects. You also said that you were living in America for a longer time, and you came back with this kind of feeling where you wanted to change things. And at the moment, we're also comparing political systems a lot and checking what's happening over there, what's happening over here. And for the topic of justice, what is it that you took home from the United States? Yes.
Well, I think it's worthwhile to look at other countries to see what we could perhaps import. And I think we thought for too long certain things couldn't happen here because of our past, that we reflect a lot, and looking at the political development that we had for a long time in Austria, that was alien to us. Well, they're our neighboring country, but it didn't make us think. But the US make us think, and I think that's important. Last year, it was interesting to be in the States, to look at the public infrastructure, to look at the health sector, and to know how unsatisfied we are. I mean, I could name 10 things that I don't like and don't work in my view, but then to compare it with another system and seeing that, well, our system isn't perfect, but it is an amazing foundation on which you can build something and improve things. And society is never finished. It would be strange if society were finished. I mean, that's my point of view, at least. And I think the US don't even have the foundation because people have a completely different perspective. What I brought home is in German, there's a term that I could never translate into English, and that term is Gemeinwesen. So after the talk, we can discuss that if you like. Obviously, we want to develop it. It's maybe community, but it's more than that. We want that the overarching structure works for people. People don't just want it to work for themselves. We want a country that works. The United States are much more individual, irrespective of the political color. But if we then listen to the society, people might think we live within an egotistic society. When we did more in common, we asked people, and 60% of the people that responded said a lot of them think about cohesion. And then we asked, do you think others? And they said only 60%. I say, well, I think about it, I'm concerned, but the others are only concerned about themselves. And I tried to approach that via more in common. And in such a system, obviously, the role is different. But what I brought home is that people do not really understand why people in Germany are not happy. Well, that happens quite often. And then people are quite stubborn. We don't want to gloss over the problems we have. We have injustices. We have huge challenges. But sometimes we think it's so bad that we don't have the strength to tackle it together. Well, I understand what you're saying when you come back from the States. Say, well, what are we talking about here? When you see problems elsewhere, on the other hand, it's always difficult to compare. So if we talk about it, and you take 80%, then 69%. You said, well, you could name 10 things that you are not happy with as well, or things that you consider unjust. The feeling of injustice, of lack of fairness, from a political point of view, is that justified? Also to the tune that exists? I don't think that's the right question, because you cannot discuss about feelings. Well, it's there, it exists. Yes. Where it makes sense, I try and find analogies from private life. And if you are trying to discuss about somebody's feelings and tell them they're not right, then that hardly ever works. And I think we just need to recognize it. We need to take note of it and appreciate it. Hans Böckler does look at things in depth very often, and it can be very detailed and also very different, because justice means different things to different people. For some people, it's wages for certain groups. For other people, it is injustices in the health system or in the taxation system or whatever. And all of these things are important. And as far as I'm concerned, the Secretary was on stage earlier, also what challenges we face in future, despite the 4 billion that are being invested. I can't even picture that. I find it difficult to picture 1 billion, 500 billion. I'm not quite sure whether it would fill this room using €1 coins, a bit like a Dagobert Duck sitting there with his coins. Well, we talk about huge sums as part of the political debate at the moment. And to then try and convey that to people, and that people think in 5 years' time, well, it was right to incur this amount of debt. That is also part of these justice debates, because looking at the media, we forget often that we don't have one government that is in the mood to incur this amount of debt. It is because we heard that people feel there is a deficit, and I think we're not talking about as such. That's being missed in the debate. It came about because the politicians listen. People are saying we are unhappy with the infrastructure, with the state of the schools, and this, that, and the other. So this is a reaction. So what we do with it as a society, that we together look at how we're spending these sums, is not just our task in the Ministry of Finance, but it's a task for all of of us. And I think in that, we are in a different phase of political togetherness compared to before the pandemic, when we said, well, I'm not really interested in politics. Yeah, they're doing quite well, but it doesn't really touch me that much in my private life. Now they're feel touched more by politics in their private life. And I think that's sort of the phase that we've entered over the last few years. Well, you said earlier, and I'm still trying to digest that, that very often we only perceive things negatively if people have to do this and have to do that. And we're talking about a modern Germany. That is the name of your unit. Well, how can I put it? Well, in Germany, sometimes we are not really great at thinking outside the box, or to say, well, okay, so people are looking at politics in certain areas where they don't have a positive view of it. So how can we do something crazy, something amazing that conveys to people, well, that's also politics. Are you considering these kind of scenarios, i.e. how you can break through this negative perception? What's the most crazy idea you can think of if you had a wish list, say? We need to find different paths, and we need to break through certain ways of thinking. Well, what I talked about earlier is about modernization of the state, and the question, how do we modernize the processes, and all of that is important to be able to spend these vast sums of money that we're talking about. But it's a different form of modernity, yes. And I think that's the focus at the moment, strong focus at the moment. And I've come to this job with a lot of humility to look around at what kind of ideas do we already have in the ministry, because people think, oh, there's so many people that don't have any ideas and they're just busy with administration. But that's not true. There are many people that have had many of ideas, sometimes failed with good ideas, so some people have given up, and some others think, well, maybe things are slightly different now. And I already received a few ideas yesterday. I had a situation where I received a letter from the Ministry of Finance that looked as if it were 20 years old, but then I managed to get somebody on the phone, and that was a bit of a disconnect between the way the letter looked and the contact I had. And I think contact with the state is cumbersome and is very tiresome. Obviously, when it comes to written communication, obviously these things have been written by lawyers, and I'm together with a lot of economists, a lot of lawyers as a political scientist, and that's obviously is different as well. So we want to see where we can improve and how we can communicate differently with people. And it's also a matter of eye levels, because the state is paid by citizens and for citizens, and sometimes that get lost. But I think you were driving at something else. Modernity beyond making the state more modern. I think that is quite a different topic, and I can't tell you today how much I can do in that respect. But when it came to more in common, I considered, how do we talk about ourselves? What do we think we can do as a country? And my idea of modernity is not that we have flying vehicles and that we get Amazon delivered by drone. That's not what I'm talking about. But it is a healthy relationship with ourselves, a country that knows both its weaknesses but also its strengths, and that we can also look one another in the eye saying, well, we all know that we need to tackle this or that. Okay, I look at you again now. It looks a bit like a cross-examination here. It's not meant to be. Right. So in terms of time, we heard earlier, well, we don't have the time. Everything needs to be done so quickly. So how much time are you giving yourself in your department? Obviously, you need results. You want results. And if we want to get from 69% to 80%, so what are the forecasts? When we're talking about modern Germany and the trust in democracy on the increase, is that something? Well, it's very difficult to give a time frame to that, but I'm sure that you have a timeline. Well, time in politics is a very interesting factor. We could have whole seminars on this. Well, I have another thought, but first of all, coming back to your question, well, don't imagine that we will start thinking a lot before we start doing. We haven't got the time for that. And obviously, we have so many subjects to tackle. And we work very closely with the Vice Chancellor. So on one day, you're talking about budgets, you talk about election of judges for the Constitutional Court and whatever. So there's huge complexity also for people working there. And we mustn't forget that for everybody, the world has become more complex. And also when it comes to the craft of politics, the structures don't really fit the complexity anymore without the individual actors being responsible for that. I think smaller things can be done immediately, and we're trying to do that. It sounds as if it's trivial, but for example, how we respond to people, we've changed that. That's not something small, that's important. Well, it might sound small, but it is important, you're right. And I always take people seriously, and people feel whether you take them seriously or not. And we're trying to do that everywhere in our work. But the big challenge in terms of factor time, I think we feel under pressure to promise a lot very quickly because the people, or because politicians know that people are dissatisfied and there's pressure from the media. But at the same time, we know that certain things take time and certain challenges cannot be solved tomorrow or from one day to another. Otherwise, they would have been tackled already. And the accusation is, well, politicians think in 4-year terms. Well, yes, that was also my challenge, right? Yeah. And at the same time, politicians don't really have the audacity to say to the citizens, well, this might take 2 or 3 years' time. That's also got something to do with trust. I always said cohesion requires 2 levels of trust. That's the trust between people who are different, and that is what we do that the state can't do, and we need the trust between the citizens and democracy. But that also means that politicians need to trust people, but it has to be a two-way street. And I joined the ministry at the end of May, 2 weeks after the government started. So there was not really a honeymoon period. Okay, maybe a bridge to our next panel at this stage, because I'd be interested in it. We will be talking about AI. And AI and justice. A few times you talked about reducing red tape on the one hand and the contact with and to people. And when it comes to reducing red tape, we're thinking about digital AI can help us, fewer people, less bureaucracy. But there is a contradiction to personal contact and creating proximity. So not more distance and more impersonal, but more proximity, more human closeness, if you want to put it in romantic terms. And I see a certain contradiction here. And the question is always, what are we talking about when we talk about reducing red tape? We think fewer people, more technology. But on the other hand, what we are missing is the proximity, something that you researched. So how do you process that contradiction? Is it a contradiction for you? And how do you integrate that into your current work. It can be a contradiction, but doesn't need to be. I know customs excise is part of the Ministry of Finance. So many people work in that sector out there. Many things are being tried out using AI process to simplify things, not necessarily in terms of human contact. And the financial authorities have interesting projects where your tax declaration is filled out, and then you can say, does it work or not? And in Hesse, there are various pilot projects in that respect. And I think the state working with these kind of possibilities is one thing, but still having the proximity, but that the state takes over a certain task. But we don't have the feeling that the state takes away some of the tasks. So with AI, it's not technology alone that can do it, but it's a matter of how we use it and for what purpose, and the same for research. I would love to meet you at a party. I would love to continue talking to you. Well, I'm really pleased about that. It's been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Danke.